All right, good morning, Buckeyes. Let's go ahead and get started. So if you can, throw on the cameras, see what kind of backgrounds you have for our Zoom theme day, or Zoo theme day, I should say. So again, today is our Zoo theme. So you'll see behind me, I have the Columbus Zoo, our own zoo in our backyard. So many of you might recognize this view. I definitely miss this view. Was hoping to see it sooner this summer than later. I also sent in chat a YouTube link with zoo noises. I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of entertaining and fun to have it on. I was lecturing earlier with the zoo sounds. Every once in a while you hear some lions roar and things like that. So again, since we all can't be together, might as well go someplace together. So the zoo is our theme for today. So if you want to throw a Zoom picture in the Zoom picture in the back, that's awesome. Dan and Nick's got theirs going on. Also, too, just to give you guys a heads up, on Tuesday our theme will be camping. So you can bust out that tent and attend class from the tent. You can find a picture like that. If you have siblings, putting a tent up inside actually is pretty entertaining and fun for them. So you might consider doing something like that. So let's go ahead and get going today. We're getting into module 40. Before we officially get into it, though, I want to take care of a couple announcements, make sure that we're on the same page, check in on a few things. So first off, just a reminder, quiz number 5 and module outline number 5 are due on next Thursday. So they're due before class on Thursday. So this is a good opportunity to get the module outline knocked out over the weekend. You can decide if you want to do the quiz as well. But I know finishing out classes can be kind of busy for you guys. So thinking about it over the weekend is a good idea. I also want to remind you guys that research credits are due next Sunday, April 26th by 5 p.m. So the psychology faculty got together, figured out the latest time that we could get the research credits lined up for you guys. To have you do. So please make sure that you're doing that. I did take a look at the class, and you guys are doing a great job getting this part wrapped up. Super excited. Lots and lots of people are done. You guys have really done a wonderful job with this. Hopefully you've been able to take advantage of them being online. That is one benefit of everything going on. But please make sure that you're getting those credits done. Remember, you get up to 20 points of extra credit. So once you've done 10 credits, you can do 2 more credits for 10 points apiece to maximize the number of research credits that you can get. And again, 20 points of that goes towards extra credit. Continue with the reminders and check-ins. SEIs, so student evaluations of courses, are open, or at least they should be soon, if not. Please take some time to complete those course evaluations. I know this class has kind of gone from one kind of class to another. We tried to hold things consistent with going online. But with that, though, I really would appreciate if you guys took some time to provide feedback. I always look at those SEI evaluations, things that students really like, that were really beneficial and helpful. I make sure to do more of things that are maybe problematic. We'll address. It's especially helpful to get feedback on the online format of this class once we switched over. So please take some time to do that. One of the biggest issues that happens is that we oftentimes get such a low response rate, meaning only a few students respond on SEIs. And as professors, we really don't know how valid that information is. So if I only hear from 3 or 4 students, I don't know if that's how everyone feels, or if that's a select group. So please spend some time doing this. Again, those evaluations help professors. They also get posted online, so you can look at them in terms of then picking out your next professors for next classes as well. So please take some time to do that. It's beneficial in a number of different ways. Looking forward a little bit more, so we have finishing off the research credits, module outline, quiz outline. The last exam is going to be on May 1st, and it's going to be due by 12:05 p.m. So basically 12:05 is when we would have been done with the exam if we're actually physically taking it together. So that's why it's that particular deadline. So kind of keeping as close as we can to that final exam schedule. We'll go through the same process that we did last time. For exam number 4, I'll release the exam approximately 24 hours before it's due. You'll submit the answer sheet again, and I'll grade it from there. So that's the process we'll go through. Again, the last exam is not cumulative. It'll be covering the material since exam number 4. Okay, so things that we're currently working on will be the focus of the exam. Okay. So with all that, just kind of going through things, questions, concerns, things that I can address for you guys, things that have come up since we last met, anything like that. Okay, and you can shout out either through voice here and interacting, or if you want to put something on chat, just let me know. All right, so the question that came through is what module outline is the next one over? And that's a great question. Give me 2 seconds to take a look. I haven't looked at it in a bit. I know we adjusted it so that you could actually look at 2 separate module outlines or to review 2 separate module outlines. So give me just 1 second. Great question. All right, so let's take a quick look. Again, it is posted online in the syllabus that was updated, but to look at it quickly here, you will be doing module 33 or 42. Okay, so for our next module assignment, again, due next Thursday before class, you can choose to do either module 33 or 42. Okay, and that got a little bit of adjusted. Yeah, it looks like Rashmi got it perfect. That got adjusted just because kind of wrapping up the semester and how things are going. Okay, so good question. Other questions? I appreciate you guys helping with answering the questions as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. If questions come up as we're going along related to the class, we can always come back to it. We can always address it. So where we left off was we were starting to finally get into different disorders. So we talked about how we diagnose disorders, the considerations that we have for them, the impact of diagnoses, the limitations of diagnoses. We got into talking about mood disorders. So we talked about major depression. We talked about bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder having some of the symptoms of major depression, but also having that distinct characteristics of having mania, these extreme experiences kind of being up and excited and overactive as a whole. And so that's kind of where we left off. We were talking about the previous module. What I'm going to do now is we're going to talk about schizophrenia and get into module 40 here. And when we talk about schizophrenia here, one of the things I want to highlight is we're going to go through it relatively quickly. I don't want to spend as much time on this, not because it's not as important, but because I want to spend a little more time on some of the anxiety disorders. But what really is key for talking about schizophrenia is to really see how much of this is biologically based. Think about the implications for trying to treat this type of disorder, and think too about kind of the extremity of these psychological disorders that individuals can have, because this is one of the most extreme psychological experiences that someone can have in terms of having schizophrenia. So first, before we delve into the biology piece of it, we delve into the meaning of this, the impact of it has on an individual. We need to define it. And when we talk about schizophrenia, we talk about it as the mind is split from reality. It's the split from one's own thoughts so that they appear as hallucination. Okay, so this idea here is that the understanding of reality, what we view as reality and how someone with schizophrenia is perceiving it, are entirely separate things. Okay, so their own thoughts start to become entirely different from what could actually be happening. And it becomes a reality to them, though, and the fact that it starts to become these hallucinations. And I think what really characterizes schizophrenia the most is this sense of psychosis. So it refers to this mental split from reality and rationality. So you'll see an example here. I'm going to show you a short video clip where they go through and kind of do a demonstration of what it's like to have schizophrenia. And you're going to see this distinct split here, where you're going to see kind of an everyday common experience of going to a therapist's office. You could equate that to going to a doctor's office, meeting with anyone. And you can imagine what that kind of reality looks like. It's an office, you sit down in a chair, the person you're interacting with is pleasant and nice, they're asking you questions. And you're going to see me watch this video clip that feeling for this person and the experience that you're going through in this video clip, this virtual reality experience that they have, totally shows that experience is not at all like what it is in the real world. Okay, so there's really no reality, there's really no rationality, things just don't make sense. And when we talk about schizophrenia, we'll talk about some distinct characteristics. And I'm going to show you this video again, but when we watch the video, what I want you to do is really focus on these particular aspects. So we talk about schizophrenia in kind of a large sense of things. We talk about it as disorganized and or delusional thinking. So this idea is that we have a pattern to our thoughts. We can follow a logical thread. We can go through the steps that we need to in order to solve or process what's going on. For individuals with schizophrenia, this is not happening for them. Okay, different experiences are popping up. They're not able to track things through. We'll see especially this idea of disturbed perceptions. So viewing things in their surroundings around them, that are threatening or harmful to them, scary, but in fact, they're not there. Okay, that's where that break from reality starts to happen. Okay. We'll also see too, we'll discuss kind of this inappropriate emotions and actions. Okay, so you won't see this one as much, but the idea here is that these individuals are responding in ways that are just not as socially appropriate or not reacting at all to things. So for example, they might start laughing at something that's very sad. And it's not because they're mocking that person. It's not because there's any thought to it. It's because their reality around them, their world around them, okay, doesn't reflect what's actually going on. Okay. So to give you a best sense of what schizophrenia is like, I want to jump into this video clip. And it's a short video clip. It is a little bit dated, but it does such a wonderful job of showing what it can be like going through a scenario where you're experiencing schizophrenia. So basically, going through this therapist's office and how there's such a split from reality and rationality in terms of what these experiences are. And as you're watching the video, I want you to take note of the delusional thinking, the disorganization, especially the disturbed perceptions. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys for several examples, and there's tons in this particular video, tons in this particular demonstration. Okay, so give me just a minute to switch this over to see the video. Again, keep your eye out for these delusional thinking, this disorganization, and especially these disturbed perceptions. All right, so let's go ahead and start. If for some reason you're not hearing it, let me know right away.
2020 Friday continues. Once again, Barbara Walters.
We've all heard stories of people who say they were driven nearly crazy by voices in their head, distracting them, commanding them to hurt themselves, occasionally to hurt others. But now, for the first time, you can actually experience for a few moments what these people live with. As they struggle.
"2020 Friday" continues. Once again, Barbara Walters.
We've all heard stories of people who say they were driven nearly crazy by voices in their head, distracting them, commanding them to hurt themselves, occasionally to hurt others. But now, for the first time, you can actually experience for a few moments what these people live with as they struggle with the illness known as schizophrenia. Dr. Timothy Johnson has news of an amazing futuristic breakthrough that puts you inside a tortured mind.
What is it really like to see strange visions and hear bizarre voices? Without being schizophrenic themselves, doctors could only imagine what patients were describing. But now there is a way for experts to truly get inside the mind of a schizophrenic. So just put it up. Using the technique of virtual reality, Janssen Pharmaceuticals has developed this device to stimulate the visual and auditory hallucinations of a schizophrenic patient.
Hi. Sorry I'm late. I had to take a phone call.
There's nothing wrong with you.
You're the one in control.
It works like this. The viewer looks into the goggles and watches an animated virtual scenario.
Are you okay? You seem distracted. Have you been seeing anything unusual?
You're no
What's wrong with you?
Letting this one tell you
You
what
can't
to do.
do anything right.
What the viewer sees is called walk in their footsteps, and it puts the viewer, in this case me, into the shoes of a schizophrenic person visiting the psychiatrist while being barraged by constant hallucinatory images and voices.
You mentioned having trouble getting to sleep last time. How have you been sleeping?
As I watch this, it's incredibly distracting, so that if I were having to try to really focus on what this doctor is saying to me, I would find it almost impossible, I think, with all these noises and sights. But what was only distracting for me was was downright frightening for Ken Steele. Okay. When Ken put on the goggles, he was emotionally thrown back to the time he could not escape the visions and voices. Within moments, he started to panic, sweating, and hyperventilating.
Last time, you were talking about volunteering.
There he is. There's the one.
Have you spoken to them yet?
Oh, it feels like what you can remember going through?
Very much so, Doctor. Yes, I remember this.
And that kind of distortion.
Yeah, yes.
The doctor would look like that to you.
Yes. This, yes. This.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry, guys.
Tim, that was extraordinary to see and hear what it is like for a schizophrenic. That's really the way it is?
Well, I could hardly believe it myself the first time I saw it, that time at Yale with Ken. So I turned to him after he had seen it, and I said, Ken, is that really what it's like? It seems so unbelievable. And he said, Tim, that is what it's like.
All right, so as we think about the video, okay, as we went through it, okay, where did you see some of the delusions, some of the, misperceptions, some of the symptoms that we saw in terms of schizophrenia? So remember, we talked about disorganized and delusional thinking, disturbed perceptions. We didn't really see the emotional piece of it, but where do we see some of these symptoms occurring? Okay, so what were some examples you saw from that video clip? All right, so we can talk about thinking about the disturbed perceptions, things that aren't really happening. Okay, there's delusional, disorganized thinking, where they're kind of thinking about things that might not be happening. Okay, so Ellie jumped in, the different color fogs that appear around the doctor. So, the perceptions of the doctor, this isn't the way a therapist normally looks, but suddenly the perception's changing. Okay, other aspects, and there's a whole bunch of examples here. So let's jump in with several. All right, so you hear the auditory hallucinations. Okay, so particularly kind of hearing the voices telling him what to do, kind of how to think. Guess that's very classic of the symptoms of schizophrenia. Okay. Suddenly you have the perception, the delusional perception that there's an eye on the top of the doctor's forehead. Okay, so perceiving something that logically makes no sense. Okay, but again, that's where that perception, that's where that break from reality happens. Okay, the movements of the doctor, suddenly the doctor's really in your face. That's not happening. Okay, so we know that while a therapist may move forward, that perception is entirely separate from what the reality is. Okay? Another great one, that disturbed perception of the rats running around. So we know we go to a therapist's office, a doctor's office, there's not rats running around. Okay, it is a healthy, sterile environment. Okay, great examples. Others, let's get a few more. The doctor's voice changes. So again, that may be a reflection of what the doctor's saying, how they're interacting with the patient, but not nearly to that extreme. Okay, so we know the doctor's not going to start, sounding really creepy like that. Again, that's part of that disturbed perception. It's that break from reality. Okay, let's get 2 or 3 other examples here. Okay, so what were some other examples, kind of thinking it through, kind of going through and visualizing the video again? So Dan's suggesting the background noise. So you start to hear things that are occurring in the background that just don't make sense. They're just not part of that actual context. I think one that is hard to see, but having watched the video a couple times, the clock on the therapist's desk goes from telling whatever time it was to saying "get out," okay, or "go out." So the idea is that, again, that disturbed perception that's not actually happening. Okay? And so what I want to do is just kind of quickly go through some of these symptoms, provide a little more detail about them. If you don't get them all written down word for word, don't worry about it. I just want to give you kind of the general sense of kind of how we think about things, okay? The particular problems that we see when we talk about schizophrenia. So one of the first pieces when we talk about it is this idea of problems in thinking and speaking. Okay, so we didn't get to capture that, and I think I can show you something kind of really quickly here demonstrating this. But we see this as kind of this disorganized speech. Okay? And this includes kind of this word salad where it doesn't really make any sense. There's no connection between the words. I once tried to even give an example of a word salad in class, and even as I was trying to give a series of random words, couldn't even come up with a good example. Okay? We also see too that there's delusions, so often bizarre, not just mistaken ideas of what's going on, but delusions of grandeur and persecution. So the idea that they're the president of countries, that they're ministers, they're church leaders, that others are trying to attack them, that there is something kind of going on in the background that's trying to bring them down. So these illusory beliefs, things that aren't actually happening, and they're often kind of bizarre and nonsensical. We also see too, in terms of problems with thinking and speaking, is they have difficulty filtering their thoughts and choosing which thoughts to believe and say out loud. So the idea here being that they're unsure of what is a true reality, a true thought they're having, and how to think it through. So you might have multiple thoughts going on at once, but you can decide what thought you want to share with someone else, what thought you want to communicate. And you might then be able to communicate out loud. For these individuals, these thoughts aren't consistent. They're kind of popping up. They're not really making any sense. They're kind of, again, expressing this delusions that aren't actually happening. So I actually have a video here. Let me see if I can get it going for us, because it's a nice one. I haven't checked to see if this one works yet, but give me a second. We'll try showing this one because it highlights this kind of word salad. Okay. All right, so give me a second. I'll share this with you guys.
Are you afraid of anything happening?
All right, so here's our video. Let me know. This will be an interview with someone who is receiving treatment for schizophrenia. We'll see what she looks like prior to it, and I'll play this video again after we talk about kind of the treatments of this as well. Okay, so this will be a good demonstration of that word salad, and hopefully this will play for us nice and smooth.
Are you afraid of anything happening?
Same question.
What do you see happening? What do you think in your future?
Why are we reading that?
I don't understand what you're trying to say.
I don't know how many guys you deal with everything. Oh, there we go.
All right, so hopefully what you're seeing from that is this idea of you could hear her, but she didn't make any sense. I mean, so hopefully your video is a little shaky, but there was really kind of no coherence to it. Okay, so she's just kind of saying things. You also saw some of the other symptoms too of schizophrenia in terms of kind of her mannerisms. So she's kind of laughing and it didn't really make sense what she was laughing at, kind of her gesturing. And that's what we see too in terms of kind of other characteristics. Okay, so we see kind of this inappropriate emotion and action. So they have odd or socially inappropriate responses. They might look bored or amused while hearing of a death. They're just not responding to, what's going on in that situation. You alternately see that they have what we call flat affect. So their body's expressionless. They don't respond with any kind of emotion. So you could tell them something that's really negative, something that would be upsetting, and they don't respond to it at all. They're not really alternatively kind of reading others. They're not understanding other people's positions and understanding. So you could see that she had that kind of word salad. you know, the therapist says, I don't understand you. And she didn't change at all. She didn't even react to the fact that the therapist wasn't understanding her. We also saw too that she had kind of body symptoms that are demonstrated with schizophrenia. So repetitive behaviors. So she was kind of moving around, kind of rocking. We can see alternatively too that individuals with schizophrenia may actually sit motionless for countless hours. Okay, so we know that that's unhealthy to sit that way, that it's physically harmful to sit that way. And imagine, you know, actually trying to do that. It would be so hard to do, but for these individuals, because their reality is so separated from what's really going on, that doesn't become problematic for them. We also see too, kind of the last general characteristics before we get into a little bit more of the biology piece of schizophrenia, is that people with schizophrenia often experience these hallucinations. And so they have these perceptual experiences that aren't shared by others. And we saw a lot of that in the video. So these hallucinations that, you know, mice were running around, the therapist was acting strange towards the patient, hallucinations of kind of this glow around the person. And so you see these hallucinations, we'll talk about why this happens, that the brain is firing in a way that makes it seem like these are actually happening, but we know that it's not. But for the individual with the schizophrenia, they think that this is what's going on around them. The most common form of these hallucinations is in fact hearing voices. And we definitely saw that in the video clip that we saw. So we're hearing voices of, you know, persecution, saying that they should get out, kind of questioning what the therapist is saying. If you want to kind of learn more about these simulations, Anderson Cooper has one where he put in headphones where they were saying things. He was hearing these voices. And he talked about how the voices weren't really coherent, how they disrupted his everyday experience because he was trying to focus on things. And these voices just kind of pop into his head. The hallucinations can also be with other visual perceptions. So it can be with smell, it can be with tactile, so even touching things. It can be kind of taste, where these hallucinations are kind of fully comprehensive. And we'll see why this is something that kind of carries across so many different dimensions. Now, when we talk about each of these symptoms, what I do is kind of come back a little bit here and talk about things from the perspective of kind of positive and negative perceptions. Okay, we'll see here when we talk about positive and negative perceptions, okay, we're not talking about these things in terms of being positive and good or negative and bad, okay, but we're going to talk about things in terms of the presence of a symptom or the absence of a healthy behavior. Okay. So when we talk about positive symptoms for schizophrenia, this is where they're going to demonstrate they have a presence of a problematic behavior, a behavior that's harmful to this person. And so we've talked about these in terms of hallucinations, where again, there's these perceptions that aren't there. They're especially auditory, where there are voices that individuals are hearing in their head. They're delusions, especially that others are trying to get them. Okay. People are telling them what to do. There's disorganized thought and nonsensical speech. You'll see how this woman goes from that nonsensical speech to after she receives treatment. You can start to very easily understand her thought patterns and this bizarre behavior, laughing when they shouldn't be, totally responding in a way that's incoherent with what's going on. So those are positive symptoms. We also have negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Again, negative here means the absence of healthy behaviors. Okay, so they're going to show flat affect. Okay, so they might have no emotional reaction. You tell them bad news. You would expect when someone gets bad news that they have a sad expression on their face, they look upset. For these individuals, that doesn't happen. There's a reduced social interaction. They're not interacting with others. In fact, even when they are interacting with others, they're not able to connect emotionally with the other person. And we know that we need these connections with others or to feel comforted, to feel supported. And this is not happening for these individuals. We see that they can experience anhedonia, which is feeling no enjoyment. So imagine going through the daily experience where you're not getting excited about things that are positive. When you get good news, you don't get, excited and happy about it. You just feel kind of at a negative or kind of baseline state all the time. And we see this can happen too with avolition, where there's less motivation, initiative, focus on a task. They can't do the things that they need to. And part of this may be a function of the fact that they have such a disorganized thought pattern, it's hard to get anything done. They also experience allegolia and catatonia. Allegolia is speaking less, and catatonia is moving less. Okay, so you can see to some degree when we talk about negative symptoms of schizophrenia, these are an absence of doing things that are healthy. Okay, you want to be moving around, you want to be speaking with others, you want to enjoy feelings that are happening, you want to be responsive to others. And this is not happening for individuals with schizophrenia. And this is again where we can see this one disorder has such an extreme impact on the individual. So let me pause at this moment to see what questions you have before we'll talk a little about kind of what's going on in terms of understanding the brain for someone who has schizophrenia and how recovery can occur for these type of individuals. Okay, and if you're all good, let me know over chat, give me a thumbs up, just say that you're all good. Just want to check in with you guys before we move forward a little bit more here. All right, so let's keep processing schizophrenia here. Okay, and again, if you're not getting everything down, that's okay. The biggest thing from this slide is talking about positive, negative symptoms of schizophrenia. But where I want to spend a little more time focusing on things is talking about what's going on in the brain for schizophrenics. And what we see here specifically is that there's a lot of abnormal brain structure and activity. So again, this is where we go back towards the very beginning of class when we talked about the different regions of the brain, talked about neurotransmitters, and we'll emphasize why that was so important in the fact that for individuals with schizophrenia, they find that there's too many dopamine or D4 receptors. And the reason why this neurotransmitter dopamine and the number of receptors is important is it helps explain the paranoia and hallucination. And so I think they describe this well in terms of saying it's like taking amphetamine overdoses all the time. Your brain is just firing too fast. The brain is firing too fast to be able to process what's real and what's not. And it leads towards this paranoia, this hallucinations that others are trying to get them. And so it's just kind of an overdose all the time. The brain is just functioning well faster than it can. And this is producing these problematic behaviors that we're seeing. In some cases, the schizophrenic shutting down. In other cases, them trying to manage to communicate, do things, but when their brain is kind of overloaded. And what we also see too, we look at brain structure, is there's poor coordination of neural firing in the frontal lobe. Okay, and we know that that frontal lobe is hugely important for judgment, decision making, so deciding what you want to do, deciding the value of the behaviors, if they're good behaviors or not, okay? Knowing what's valuable, judgment, in this case, if something is happening really in reality or not. And we also know too that it's rather important to have self-control. And that's what we see with schizophrenics. We don't see self-control really at all. So one of the things that happens here is that we see this kind of neural firing. The brain is firing with too much receptors, and that frontal lobe is not able to organize this information. Okay? In fact, what we see is that the thalamus fires during hallucinations as if it was actually a real sensation being perceived. Okay, so the thalamus fires during these hallucinations as if something is really happening. So when we think about individuals with schizophrenia, it's not that this is some kind of choice. It's not that they're trying to make things up or they're indulging in this. It's really brain structures and neurotransmitters in the brain that are causing these behaviors. We even see too with kind of brain structure, there's general shrinking of many brain areas and connections between them. So even, especially when this is not brought on by trauma, we see that this is something that the brain is severely affected and it's being manifested in the schizophrenic symptoms. So this highlights kind of one of the other points I really wanted to spend time with schizophrenia is talking about the biological piece of this disorder, and how many of the things we'll be talking about have a strong biological piece, many of these psychological disorders. And so I don't, go through this slide, not necessarily for all the details and ins and outs of it, but for the overall takeaway that there's a lot happening in terms of the brain structure and neurotransmitters that are causing this type of symptoms, that's causing these severe reactions. Now, in terms of kind of the onset and development of schizophrenia, we'll see that with some of the ways that the brain is structured and the activity, it can be addressed, but in other cases, it's going to be more difficult to help someone that has this schizophrenia. So the first of this is that the onset of schizophrenic symptoms appear at the end of adolescence and early adulthood, a little bit later for women than men. And in terms of prevalence, it's nearly 1 in 100 people develop schizophrenia. So it's not necessarily something that's a very often occurring disorder. Okay, so we're not highlighting it necessarily for that component, but highlighting more so in terms of its implications, okay, or showing how you can have such a strong reaction due to these brain abnormalities and neurotransmitters. And one of the things I want to highlight, we'll talk about this as we go along, is that schizophrenia develops at the end of adolescence, early adulthood. Actually, it's right in the wheelhouse of when we see many different psychological disorders beginning. Okay, so your age group that you're in is currently the time we see a lot of psychological disorders developing. Okay, you're away from home a lot of times. Maybe it's the first time you've left home. The stressors of managing class, being independent, all these things may kind of take a toll and put stressors on college-age students. And this is where we start to see some of these psychological disorders developing. Okay, so that's something really to keep in mind for yourself, for your classmates around you, your friends around you, kind of monitoring their mental health, because this is when disorders start to develop. Now, in terms of treating schizophrenia, when we talk about something as being acute or reactive, this is something that where recovery might be more likely. So if someone's experiencing these symptoms due to stress, some people might develop those positive symptoms, such as hallucinations, those delusions, but these can be treated by getting back to what that stressor was and trying to treat and address that stressor. And if this is successful, then recovery is more likely. Okay, same thing with kind of depression. If you can go back to whatever caused the depression, the initial discomfort, the initial harm, that may then alleviate that depression. If you lost a job, you can become more comfortable with that, accepting of that, then you can move to the depression. Same thing here with schizophrenia. If they can see and understand what the stressor was, they can potentially address that in order to then reduce the amount of hallucination. Now, on the other hand, though, when schizophrenia develops more slowly, with more of those negative symptoms where they become catatonic, they have anhedonia, they're not interacting with others, we see that this is going to be the hardest type of schizophrenia to treat. Okay, so with treatment and support, there may be periods kind of normal life, but there's no cure for this particular group. Okay, so there's no way to deal with the abnormalities of the brain, to adjust neurotransmitters, to try to go back to original stressor that might have caused this. For this group, they can only really kind of provide the best support possible. Okay, so this also shows that for some of our psychological disorders, there's no way to kind of, fix this. Sometimes it's just a matter of treating the symptoms as best as possible. So we went through kind of schizophrenia quickly, but hopefully you've kind of picked up on the two key pieces of showing how there's a lot of biology-based disorders and talking to you about kind of these extremes of what happens for these different psychological disorders. Okay, so let me pause at this point to see if you have any questions, things I can help with, things I can answer for you guys, or clarify, or go back through. Okay, and if you're all good, send me a message over chat saying that you're all set. Otherwise, we can pause a little bit more, work through things here. All right, so before we turn into getting into the next module, module 41, talking about anxiety disorders, what I actually want to do is give everyone a chance to take a quick break here. So go ahead and take 2 or 3 minutes. Go ahead and stretch, get away from the computer. You can check your email, check in with friends or family members, but go ahead just for a minute or two, go ahead and get away from the computer, get yourself kind of reset so that when we come back, we're in good shape and ready to go. Okay, so everyone take a little bit of a break here. I know it's tiring to kind of sit in front of the computer for long periods of time, so go ahead and take a break, then we'll come back together in about 2 or 3 minutes.